In Burundi, in Central Africa, a young man named Jojo found a mass grave containing countless bodies. Along with the help of forensic anthropologist Dr. Kathy Andrews, the military discovered that this terrible tragedy was a consequence caused by the civil war in the region. The research team then set up camp and began investigating this area. At that time, Kathy found traces of another grave near the riverbank. She used a shovel and began digging to search for more bodies. But suddenly, the female doctor felt a strong tremor emanating from the ground. Immediately after, a giant beast lunged up from the river and attacked Kathy. In just a few seconds, she was dragged down into the water. The colonel called his team over and tried to destroy the creature, but they only saw the river water swirling violently. And a moment later, everything fell into complete silence. Finally, Kathy's body began to float to the river's surface, but her head had been bitten off and the rest of her body continued to be dragged down to the bottom of the water. Far away from there, in New York, a television program was interviewing a businessman who claimed that he had been falsely accused by a local reporter. That reporter was Tim Manfrey, who, according to the latest information, had used fake evidence in his article. Tim witnessed everything through a screen in his office and tried to explain that he truly believed in his sources, but he was immediately called into the office of Roger, his boss. The reporter tried to justify himself, but Roger only gave him one last chance to keep his job. The boss then introduced him to Aviva Masters, a female reporter specializing in the animal world, who was planning to do a report on the horrific incident in Burundi. She said that in that area lived a giant Nile crocodile, called Gustav by the locals. It is the largest predator on the entire African continent, and is the culprit that ate the anthropologist Kathy, making this case famous worldwide. Aviva then asked for Tim's help, and despite not having any experience in this field, he still agreed to go along to keep his seat at the newsroom. Many days later, the two flew to Africa, and Tim decided to bring along Stephen, his cameraman and best friend. Upon arriving in Burundi, they were met at the airport by Harry, who warned them about the civil war ravaging the region. He said there were rebel groups constantly attacking villages under the command of a man calling himself Little Gustav, named after the local man-eating monster. For safety reasons, the group was escorted on a military boat to the port, where they met the fourth member of the expedition, Matt. He is a wildlife expert and intends to capture the animal alive to put on his television program. With the team ready, they headed down the river towards the village where Gustav was last seen. The trip went quite smoothly until midnight, when gunshots rang out and soldiers announced that rebels were attacking the boat. Despite the surprise raid, the soldiers destroyed the group of gunmen in just a few minutes thanks to the heavy firepower on the boat. Fortunately, no one in the group was injured, but Tim quickly realized that the crocodile would not be the only threat on this expedition. The group continued their journey to the northern area of Burundi, where there was a small, rustic village by the lake. As dawn broke, a small dog standing on a raft began to bark fiercely towards the water, right near where a little girl accidentally dropped her doll. The girl swam out to retrieve the toy, but tragically, Gustav suddenly rose from the water and attacked the girl. A few hours later, Tim's group made another stop and met Jacob, a famous local hunter who was hired to help them find the crocodile. He had heard about the tragic incident of the little girl and advised the group to kill the monster because it would never let itself be caught alive. However, Matt opposed that idea because no matter what, Gustav was a rare individual and needed to be preserved. Furthermore, he revealed that among his equipment, he had brought parts to assemble a giant cage for the purpose of capturing the monster. Jacob did not believe they could catch the animal alive, but he still decided to go with the group and lead them to the village where the attack had just occurred. Upon arrival, everyone was warmly welcomed by the local people. Despite facing the threat from Gustav, they still had to stay here because their entire livelihood depended on the river. To warn of the crocodile's appearance, they left a dog on a raft. It would bark in alarm whenever it sensed something strange approaching. Aviva felt extremely sympathetic towards the little dog, so she pulled the raft in and gave it some food. When night fell, the expedition group had dinner with the villagers, and after the meal, they were introduced to the village chief, a shaman. He performed a ritual to protect the travelers from the dangers they were about to face. The next morning, the young men in the village helped Matt assemble the cage and offered to carry it for him in exchange for some wages for the village. Having finished the preparations, they walked across the trail to head to the river. On the way, they encountered a group of rebels armed to the teeth. Despite their threatening appearance, these men only stood and observed, allowing them to pass through. By the end of the day, the group set up camp near the riverbank, and Jacob gave Tim a mixture he had made himself to attract Gustav. When opening the jar, the reporter felt nauseous because of the foul stench, and the hunter explained that he had made a special mixture from blood. Matt brushed it off and said it was unnecessary because besides the cage he also brought a dart gun and would use it to deal with the creature. Jacob warned him that anesthetic darts could not penetrate its armor-like scales. But Matt explained that it was actually a type of dart containing a tracking device. If it hit, they would always know where the crocodile was. Nevertheless, Jacob still decided to use his own method. Inside the cage, he locked a live goat and smeared the blood mixture on it to act as bait. After the camp was set up, the local people received their wages and left. Except for the little dog who decided to stay with Aviva. She happily adopted it, named it Coyote, and brought it into her tent. When night fell, the reporting team was introduced to Jojo, who was the young man who participated in Dr. Kathy's expedition before, and he had volunteered to help in capturing Gustav. Many hours passed. The whole group waited wearily for the target to appear until they noticed an unusual movement under the river. Through the camera, Jacob saw the crocodile approaching, and he quickly ran out with Matt to check if the cage trap was working. With his gun loaded, he observed the increasingly boiling water until the giant monster approached right next to the cage. Everyone held their breath, hoping it would fall into the trap. But Gustav proved to be more cunning than they thought. It backed away and slithered back to the river. Even so, Matt kept the crocodile in his sights, and with a precise shot, he successfully embedded the tracking dart into its scales. The next morning, Matt continued to track Gustav's signal through a handheld device, but he decided to try another type of bait and asked the group to bring the carcass of an animal. While they were preparing the new trap, Stephen decided to take a walk around the field because he wanted to record more beautiful images of this area. However, the cameraman suddenly heard footsteps approaching. Stephen quickly hid in the bushes and witnessed a group of rebels who had captured the village shaman along with his family. They seemed to be interrogating the family, but the shaman determinedly did not say a word. Angry, a rebel pulled out a machete and ruthlessly beheaded him. Unable to do anything to help, Stephen could only hide well, silently filming the entire horrific event and then hurried back to camp. He showed the tape to Tim and Aviva. The female reporter was utterly horrified by what happened and suggested they both take these images to the authorities immediately. Jacob warned that it was useless because the military would not intervene in the Civil War. Meanwhile, Matt coldly emphasized that the core goal of this trip was to find the crocodile, not politics. The female reporter became angry at that insensitive attitude and went back to her tent. However, Tim and Stephen promised to take the tape to international organizations so they could resolve this issue. In the meantime, Jojo secretly crawled inside the cage, and without hesitation, he began to loudly call Gustav, challenging it to a confrontation. It seemed that this young man had a deeper purpose in capturing the monster. But instead of appearing at the front of the cage, the crocodile suddenly rose right at the side and rammed hard into the steel structure. The impact caused the cage door to slam shut, trapping Jojo inside, and the boy began to panic and call for help. Still not satisfied, Gustav lunged up and pressed over the giant cage, and with its terrible weight, it overturned the structure, rolling it straight into the river. Tim and the others heard the cries for help and ran out, just as they saw the giant crocodile rushing towards the boy. Jacob did not waste a second. He threw a grenade into the river. But when he was about to throw a second one, Matt stopped him because he didn't want to miss the chance to catch the animal alive. As the crocodile drew closer, Tim dove into the water to save Jojo. But one of the soldiers accompanying them suddenly grabbed his gun and fired wildly into the river. Stephen hurried to stop him before he accidentally shot his friend. A few seconds later, Tim rose to the surface, pulling Jojo to safety. However, the boy had stopped breathing. Stephen immediately performed CPR along with chest compressions until Jojo regained consciousness. Tim asked why he risked his life like that, and Jojo choked back tears, saying he wanted to help them catch the crocodile in exchange for a visa to live in America. The soldier went mad at the boy's impulsive action and rushed in to kick him, forcing Tim and Stephen to stand up and protect him. The soldier left resentfully, but Jojo was too scared, so he also ran headlong alone into the middle of the field. After that encounter, Gustav escaped and Jacob lashed out at Matt, asserting that this animal needed to be destroyed before it was too late. A few minutes later, at the camp, Aviva went to see how the dog Coyote was doing, but instead heard a painful bark coming from inside the tent. Right then, the soldier from before appeared. Seeing the female reporter, he pointed his gun at her and forced her to go into the tent. Here, the depraved man tried to attack Aviva, but she fought back fiercely and kicked the pervert away. The stubborn soldier rushed forward, but unfortunately for him, Gustav tore through the tent, broke in, and grabbed him for a meal. Aviva seized the golden opportunity and ran for her life. Tim found her covered in blood and asked what had happened. The whole group returned to the camp. only to find everything destroyed and the incomplete corpse of the soldier. Realizing the crocodile was a much more terrible threat than they imagined, Tim called everyone together, deciding to turn back and cancel the entire expedition. Matt tried to convince him to stay because Gustav was right nearby and they could still end the trip by capturing the animal. While the two were arguing, Jacob hurriedly intended to run and inform the group, but before he could do anything, he was hit by a bullet from the soldier. The traitor controlled the whole group and forced them to walk to the riverbank. Arriving there, he made everyone kneel with their backs turned. But Stephen resolutely refused to obey and a loud gunshot rang out. Tim was horrified, thinking his friend was dead, but instead, the soldier collapsed from a bullet from Jojo, who had just appeared with a rifle in his hand. Stephen thanked him for saving his life and promised he would definitely take him to America no matter what. Now, having temporarily escaped danger, the group moved to a shack built on wooden stilts on the river. Aviva tried to use the radio to call for help while Tim bandaged Jacob's wound. Feeling himself getting weaker, the hunter tiredly recounted that many years ago he had confronted Gustav when the crocodile attacked his wife on this river. Unfortunately, she did not survive and Jacob frantically poured bullets into the monster. But the bullets only left a few scars on its armored body. He earnestly pleaded that this monster must be destroyed. And just as he feared, Gustav reappeared. Everyone heard the beep-beep of the tracking signal approaching. Tim hurriedly grabbed a gun and fired towards the creature. But the crocodile used its strength to crash repeatedly into the wooden poles supporting the shack. The shack structure began to sink. Matt panicked and intended to run across the wooden bridge, but Gustav lunged up and smashed the bridge, causing it to collapse. The expert had to turn back and jump back to the shack, but the crocodile attacked once again from below, knocking everyone into the water, making them easy targets for the beast. Tim shouted for everyone to climb onto the ruins of the shack and tried to pull up Jacob, who was still very seriously injured. However, the veteran hunter was determined to finish this monster once and for all. He pulled the pin of his last grenade and waited for the creature to rush in. Gustav lunged out of the water, snapped up Jacob, and dragged him down to the deep bottom. The group heard a muffled explosion underwater and believed the hunter had finally destroyed the evil beast. Tragically, his sacrifice was in vain. Not only did the crocodile emerge gasping for air and very much alive, but it also tossed Jacob's body into the air and chewed it ravenously with its sharp teeth. After being satiated, Gustav left, and the surviving group had to spend a horrific night on the ruins of the shack, not knowing how to escape this nightmare. By dawn, they saw a helicopter flying over the area, and they needed to cross the river to call for rescue. Despite knowing it was full of danger, Stephen was the first to jump down. He held his camera tightly and waded through the water without seeing the crocodile's shadow anywhere. The others followed, and as soon as their feet touched land, they ran headlong towards the helicopter, frantically calling for help. Suddenly, an explosion shook the field, and Tim shouted for everyone to quickly find a place to hide. However, Matt stubbornly ran headlong towards the helicopter when he was suddenly hit by a car. From inside the car, two rebels working for little Gustav stepped out. They seemed to be desperately searching for something. The group held their breath and hid in the bushes, and the boy Jojo revealed that the rebels had been informed about the video recording the execution of the shaman. If this video fell into the hands of the authorities, they would be in big trouble, and that was why they were scouring to find the tape. Tim then realized the video was saved in the laptop inside a briefcase. However, during Gustav's attack, the briefcase had been lost, taking the important tape with it. Finally, the two rebels stopped searching. However, the second rebel became suspicious that someone was hiding around here and began to fire indiscriminately into the bushes. The group decided to recklessly charge out. The four people rushed across the field with the rebels chasing close behind. Not only did they have submachine guns, but they also brought anti-tank weapons and fired directly at the fleeing group. They luckily dodged within a hair's breadth. To increase their chances of survival, Tim ordered everyone to scatter. The four people ran in 4 different directions across the field. The rebels chose to chase Aviva first. The female reporter ran as fast as possible. But just as she was about to be caught, Jojo lunged out to block them and fired directly at the car's windshield. Unfortunately, his shots did nothing, and the boy was forced to retreat when he was hit in the shoulder by a rebel's bullet. The shot caused Jojo to tumble into the river, but the rebel's car also didn't notice the large hole right in front and crashed down. The driver survived, but the gunman was thrown out due to the force of the impact against a tree. Despite being injured, Jojo still struggled to get up to try to escape, but the rebel holding a machete also lunged down into the river. He submerged the young man in the water and intended to finish him, but right then Tim appeared, pointing Jojo's gun directly at the madman's head. He ordered him to let the boy go and get lost. However, the rebel did not flinch. He slowly stepped towards Tim. The reporter pulled the trigger only to realize the gun was completely out of bullets. The rebel immediately rushed in and beat him continuously. Tim did not give up. He successfully neutralized his opponent's knee with a kick while Jojo struggled to pick up the last bullet that had been dropped. The two engaged in hand-to-hand combat, but despite his great efforts, Tim gradually became exhausted and was pinned to the ground by the man who was prepared to take his life. At that critical moment, Jojo threw the last bullet to Aviva. The female reporter quickly loaded the bullet, pointed the gun straight at the villain's head, and pulled the trigger. The perpetrator lost his life, and their group was temporarily safe, but in the chaos of being pursued, they had lost Steven. At the same time, the cameraman had found another path along the river and tried to climb back onto the bank, but encountered a snake dangling from a tree. Steven recoiled in surprise, accidentally brushing his arm against the sharp thorns of a tree and began to bleed. The fatal problem was that the drops of blood falling into the lake became bait that awakened Gustav. The giant crocodile suddenly rose right behind Steven's back. There was no more time to hesitate. He ran for his life. But the monster was too fast and was about to snap him up. Thinking this was the end, Steven risked himself by leaping through the gap between two trees close together, causing the giant monster's head to be jammed tight. He seized this golden opportunity and ran far away, leaving even his camera behind. A few seconds later, the camera lens recorded the scene of Gustav struggling to escape the tree jam and continuing to rush with terrifying speed to hunt down its prey. Far from there, Tim tried to search for Steven, but in vain. While Jojo's shoulder was losing a lot of blood, they were in a stalemate, not knowing what to do when suddenly a car appeared bringing Harry, who came to rescue them. Tim recounted what happened to the remaining members of the group, and Harry promised to take them back. However, he suddenly asked where the video recording on the computer was. The reporter immediately became suspicious because he had not mentioned that tape. Knowing he had been exposed, Harry ordered his soldiers to control Tim and Aviva. The man then took off his mask, revealing himself as little Gustav, the leader of the rebels. He was desperately hunting for the video because it was the evidence accusing his involvement in crimes during the Civil War. Tim resolutely would not say where the machine was, but Harry began to assault Aviva and threatened to kill her on the spot. Having no choice, Tim had to confess that the computer had a signaling device attached that could be found through his handheld detector. Harry forced Tim to lead the way, not suspecting that the reporter was planning to lead him straight to the giant crocodile's lair. Tim tracked the detector signal pointing to the area around the river. Arriving at the bank, Harry found one of the boats the team had used. He ordered everyone onto the boat. A few minutes later, they arrived at the location indicated by the detector. Fearing the crocodile might appear, Harry forced Tim to go find the computer. Otherwise, his soldier would not hesitate to shoot and kill the two of them. Tim agreed, but before going, he secretly took from the boat a jar containing the bait mixture that Jacob had prepared. He pretended it was an energy drink, gave it to Aviva, and told her to use it when necessary. Then Tim moved to the position location and found the tracking dart, but the crocodile was not there. Instead, Tim was devastated when he found Steven's body floating in the middle of the lake. Heartbreakingly, his best friend could not escape the jaws of the monster Gustav. Tim bitterly mourned the tragic death of his friend, but he also picked up a knife dropped next to Steven's body. Regaining his spirit with a sudden and decisive sneak attack, Tim took down the guard following him. Hearing a strange noise, Harry called back to ask what was happening when suddenly Aviva splashed the entire heavy-smelling mixture onto the dictator and ran. She managed to escape to Tim's location, but Harry quickly caught up and shot Tim down with 2 bullets to the leg. He pointed his gun, prepared to finish them both, when right then all 3 heard the thundering footsteps of Gustav, the monster hiding in the shadows to choose its first target of attack. And luckily, because of the bait smeared all over him, the crocodile decided to target Harry. The villain panicked completely, turned his back to run, but Gustav rushed in like lightning and swallowed him whole with just one tyrannical snap. Tim and Aviva did not waste a second, helping each other flee towards the car where Jojo was waiting despite still being injured in the shoulder. Unexpectedly, the whole group heard a barking sound echoing from the river, and Aviva saw Coyote still alive, trying to swim to shore. She rushed right out to pick the dog up, when Gustav rose from the water again and rushed straight towards them. Stepping hard on the gas, Tim drove the car straight into the giant crocodile, pushing it backward into the water, saving both Aviva and Coyote. Getting everyone into the car, Tim hit the gas to reverse, but the rear wheels got bogged down in the thick mud. Worse still, the vengeful monster returned with its terrifying strength. It smashed through the car body, poked its head inside, and opened its mouth wide, intending to swallow everyone. But because it entered a narrow space, Gustav got stuck. Tim grabbed a machete in the car and slashed frantically at the creature's snout. In pain, the giant crocodile backed away, creating an opportunity for the group to escape, leaving behind the greatest predator of all Africa. Many days later, Aviva and Tim boarded a plane back to America, bringing along Steven's camera and the final footage that their late friend had recorded. Traveling with them were Jojo and the little dog Coyote. The boy finally fulfilled his dream and prepared to embrace a new life in the promised land. As for Burundi, the government finally quelled the civil war and the people in the poor villages were able to live in peace, at least for the time being. Nevertheless, the monster Gustav is still alive. It continues to crawl through the deep rivers of Africa to hunt for new prey. Overall, this is an extremely worth-watching monster survival movie. Even though it was produced in 2007, the way it builds a tense atmosphere, the fast pacing, and the design of the crocodile Gustav are still enough to make modern audiences shudder. This work still maintains its wild, authentic colors and a very distinct, raw sense of danger. Particularly, the African setting combining war and monsters creates a unique layer of conflict. It is not simply man versus beast, but also a confrontation between humans and greed, power, and fear. The visual effects, though not top tier by modern standards, are still impressive enough. Many attack scenes are staged with tension and weight. However, the film also has a few slightly illogical details. For instance, characters escaping death narrowly many times in a rather lucky way, the script, or the almost supernatural endurance of the crocodile after large explosions. Even so, it is exactly that exaggeration that contributes to increasing the entertainment value and drama for the story. Overall, this is a monster movie with more depth than expected, blending action, politics, and survival quite effectively. If I were to give it a score, I would give it about 8 out of 10 for the consistent tension, interesting ideas, and an animal antagonist powerful enough to be haunting.